And from here at San Diego State, besides myself, Dr. Ron Chadbajian, who's an environmental economist, Maddie Lietzma, who's a student in environmental, or rather in economics, Nicholas Lopez, who is another assistant professor here at the School of Public Health, and Emin Carrillo, a student here in the School of Public Health. So we are about ready to go, and I want to thank you all for signing up. Welcome. We'll be having some time at the end for questions, but please feel free to, first of all, sign into the chat room. Nicholas, do you want them to do that or not? We don't need to do that. Okay, don't sign into the chat room unless you've got questions. I think we've got everybody's data from the sign-up sheet, so that'll be good. Okay. So today's agenda, we're going to be talking about the project, and I'll be giving a little overview of the background to this. And then we'll review some of the previous studies that have been published. You may be familiar with these. One of the studies is based on San Francisco, who did a litter audit and implemented a litter fee back in 2009. So they've been at it for a while. We'll talk about the current approaches we're using to try to estimate the cost of tobacco product waste. And we'll run through briefly, and it'll be a little bit more, I think, than most people want to hear, but the economic model toolkit that we put together that will be available as a link, along with some fact sheets that will help support your education on how to figure out the economic cost of tobacco product waste. We'll talk a bit about policy implications for any sort of economic estimates that do get produced, and hopefully have time to answer a few questions. This is scheduled for an hour and a half. I think we'll probably easily fill that time up. But again, much of this resources will be available through online linkages. So I just want to make a quick comment. Back in 1992, I was at the University of California, Berkeley, and we put together a MMWR. This is the CDC's weekly kind of newsletter. It's more of a journal article, very carefully reviewed. We did a study to estimate the medical care expenditures attributable to cigarette smoking in the United States. This was using a really good data set. I mean, the data is all about what you get to put into an estimation and what you get out of it that becomes quality or not. And we had a wonderful data set that allowed us to see what the risk factors that people had with all their social demographic status, smoking history, et cetera. And we were able to come up with a very robust estimate of the medical care costs attributable to cigarette smoking. That was taken up by a group of lawyers who were deputized by the state's attorneys general and took that forward to sue the tobacco industry back in the late 90s, such that it progressed this lawsuit so far into actually our Congress, and something called the multi-state agreement was reached between the major tobacco companies and the manufacturers, rather, and the U.S. states through their attorneys general. This ended up then providing reimbursement to the states for billions of dollars for the indefinite future, depending on their market shares. And also established the Truth Initiative and the UC San Francisco Truth Documents Library. We've got a little bit of background noise, so make sure everybody gets their speakers or their microphones muted, please. Thanks. So that means, you know, there's something to learn from that process. You know, if we have a good economic estimate of the environmental costs of tobacco product use, perhaps something along those lines in terms of policy can be pursued with the environmental perspective. So the purpose of this project, then, we established an economic model advisory committee, and we just actually had our last meeting of that group an hour or so ago. These were 15 members that had expertise in environment, tobacco, economics, and we got a lot of good information inputs and expanded our sort of universe of knowledge about tobacco product waste and what are the ramifications of that. we did some reviewed case studies of what's been done on other environmental issues to estimate costs, and I'll review those briefly with you. We then developed a list of cost centers, that is, places where the cost of tobacco product waste can be impacted, that is, places where money is spent to deal with this environmental pollution. And then we were going to use 3 California or more California communities to come up with a case study of the economic costs that affect them. So we'll present some data on San Diego and Santa Cruz and perhaps a few other cities here during this presentation as well. And then what we tried to do was to take everything we've learned and incorporate it into a toolkit. Now, this is not a toolkit that's going to just be a plug and play into your cell phone. It's basically a description of the background and the processes and the data needs that a community or group of communities could put together to come up with an estimate of tobacco product waste. So it's not a complete project that is just, put it into place and let it happen, but it's the building blocks of how a community might do a much more detailed cost assessment for tobacco product waste. So getting back to these other examples from history, some of these will be familiar to you. For instance, Superfund. And this is under federal law that heavily contaminated sites have to be addressed. And there are economic costs to that, of course. Who's going to clean these things up and who pays for it are all part of the questions. There are both direct sort of cleanup costs, but also secondary costs, like things that have affected quality of life or community integrity that need to be dealt with. These are enormous projects with enormous costs to rectify the damages, but it's an economic issue for sure. Needed to be solved by federal law, in fact. Single-use plastics, this is increasingly an issue. I think we all realize that, there's so much plastics in the ocean, metric tons wise, it's, millions. It's not just there, it's in the ground, it's in human bodies, and it's a substantial source of environmental pollution that now is being addressed through a treaty under the United Nations Environment Program. Negotiations are underway to think about what products we can get rid of, what chemicals we can get rid of that are in plastics, and how we can protect the environment from further damages as well as clean it up. There may be long-term human health effects of these. We don't know about that as yet, but these have both direct costs, that is cleanup costs, and indirect costs because of all of the unmitigated waste that's floating around in the ocean in the garbage patches, for instance. Invasive species is another issue that requires economic attention because there's a lot of non-native, usually anthropogenic kind of introduction of animals, microbes, plant species. And these cost money, control costs. They can threaten ecosystems, they can threaten crop production, crop yields, all sorts of health impacts potentially as well. Secondary costs, things like loss of tourism revenue, loss of property tax, things that you don't think about upfront. But again, another example of there's a cost to environmental problems that can be estimated and needs to be addressed in order to rectify the damages that are there. So we thought about all of the direct costs that could be generated from tobacco product waste. Much of this has to do with cleaning up, and we'll talk a lot about that here in a bit, but direct costs, things like mechanical street sweeping, sidewalk cleaning, area cleanups through manual pickups. Those can be voluntary, for instance. A lot of beach cleanups are done every month practically, or every day, even some places. Stormwater systems clean out, and this is important because the trash amendment to the California Clean Water Act requires that nothing greater than 5 millimeters goes into the stormwater system, and that would include cigarette butts, for instance. And so there's costs to maintaining and cleaning these elements out that are attributable to tobacco product waste. There are things that we focus on in prevention. Litter laws are sort of an attempt to prevent waste. They're seldom enforced when it comes to tobacco product waste, butt flicking, et cetera. But nevertheless, there's a cost of implementing them and enforcing them. There are outdoor smoking bans that help to prevent tobacco product waste. And again, there are signage, campaigns, et cetera, that are associated with this that are prevention costs. But the problem is not all of these places have data that are accessible. It's very difficult. And we found this to be the case, that we can't just get, what the cost of manual cleanup of cigarette butt waste, unless you have a research project that sends a whole bunch of people out to pick up cigarette butts and measure them. And we've got that kind of data now. So the secondary costs, again, I mentioned this in terms of those three other areas. And this is something where it's very difficult to assess in the case of tobacco product waste. We don't know what the long-term damage is in the environment. We do know that there's plastics that come off of the filters, and there's trillions of cigarettes smoked around the world every year. And it may be that they're causing long-term damage. We don't know what that is, but we do know that there are chemicals from tobacco product waste. There are batteries from single-use e-cigarettes, all of which may have ecosystem damages. There are certainly microplastics from them. There may, in fact, be human health damages. But what we really have more information on is sort of the toxicity of tobacco product waste in laboratory settings rather than in field settings. So more and more, though, that those kind of data are being collected. So our proposed method for calculating costs is to identify these cost centers, direct measurement of cleanups, that is this left one here, I guess, this one, and then the proportional measurement of all waste that ends up being tobacco product waste. For instance, we know that some storm drain systems, stormwater systems, have counted all of the waste products coming through them, and it's found that about 8% of what ends up in a storm drain in a normal city is tobacco product waste, for instance. We don't know that throughout all of California, but it's something that can be estimated. The cost of TPW, tobacco product waste prevention and abatement, I talked a little bit about that. So all of these pieces, these cost centers, are what could be incorporated into a mathematical model that we would consider the economic cost model. So I'm going to move forward here and ask my colleague, John Schneider and Ron Chadbejian, talk about the three approaches to estimating TPW abatement costs.
Yeah, sure. I'll get that started. I'm John Schneider. I'm in consulting now, but used to be in academia. And Tom and I met, and what he described his years back in Berkeley, that's where I met him. So we've been working together on this kind of thing for a while now. So happy to see everyone on the call, and I appreciate you tuning in. So the proportional, well, actually, the slide that Tom was showing previously with the green diagram on it was suggested one of these methods, and that was the proportional estimation method. You recall the middle of that diagram had a box that said we look at the proportion of all litter costs that are TPW related. So that's just one method, and there's actually two others that we explored as part of this effort, part of this work that we've been doing for the last few years. So, but just to give you the broad overview sketch, we've got that proportional estimation method, which assumes that for a given jurisdiction, the cost of tobacco product waste is going to be some proportion of the cost of all waste in the community. That makes sense, right? I mean, at least conceptually, it's hard to argue with that. Of course, for practical purposes, we have to come up with, well, what is the proportion? There are some studies out there. There's maybe three or so. That's not a lot, but there's three data sources out there, studies that are out there suggesting what nationally what that proportion is. And those studies typically show it's somewhere between 20%, 30%, usually falls around 24, 25%. So in other words, what that means is of all general litter, not waste, because sometimes that means regular trash disposal, but of litter costs, about 25%, about a quarter of it is attributable to tobacco product waste. That's a lot. A quarter of anything is a lot. Um, so why it's so much is because it is a very commonly littered item, as a lot of you know. It's something that if you have it in your hand, there's a pretty high probability that you're going to throw it on the ground. There's a pretty high probability that you're going to dispose of it in some other means other than a proper trash receptacle. So we know that about tobacco products, and that's a whole literature devoted to that. So if we know it's 25% roughly, so we can then figure out what a city's costs are for general litter abatement and multiply it by that 25%. We can also adjust that 25% based on the smoking prevalence in that city. And there's other things that we can do. And some of that we do in what we call the statistical estimation method that Ron will talk about. But before we get there, proportional estimation is sort of the most straightforward. We did it in San Francisco, excuse me, years ago, and used that to, the city used that to determine what level a tobacco product waste fee should be set at. And they determined that level, and then they actually then implemented that as a fee in the city starting a few years after we did our work. So let's say 2010, 2011, sometime around there, and they've been doing it ever since. So that's proportional estimation. There's also a paper that Tom and I worked on, published in 2020, that looked at used this proportional estimation method to calculate costs in several cities. And I think we might have a slide on that. But before we get there, another method is to look at sales volume estimation. So in other words, let's just look at how many tobacco items were sold. Let's just make it simple and say, let's look at the number of cigarettes sold. And then let's apply something from the literature that tells us what proportion of those are going to be littered. And then we need one other thing, which is how much effort does it take to pick those things up. And if we can get all of those things, then we can use, and we can estimate tobacco product waste costs from sales volume data, which is nice because companies like Nielsen, which is what we used when we did it, had to track sales volume of anything, including tobacco products. So we can use data from companies like Nielsen to estimate sales volume and use that to estimate TPW cost. Now, again, the propensity to litter, what proportion winds up on the ground, that's going to differ by jurisdiction. So maybe there's some things we can do to adjust that. So maybe perhaps in a more environmentally conscious city, you might have less littering going on the ground. Okay, and then the statistical estimation method, I'm going to leave that to our colleague Ron to describe.
So I'll just give you a brief overview here, and then we'll give a little bit more detail in just a bit. I'm Ron I guess I should introduce myself just quickly. I'm Ron Shabijian. I'm an environmental economist at San Diego State University. Formerly worked for the United States EPA for many years. Estimated the cost of regulations as opposed to the cost of TPW abatement. So in this case, in the statistical model, what we did is we used data from a really unique pilot project here at SDSU done by York Met and some of his colleagues, where they went out and actually counted and categorized and geocoded and photographed individual TPW items in 60 census blocks in San Diego County. So we literally have an exact count of the amount of TPW at each of these census blocks. And for those of you who don't know what a census block is, just think where you live and think about the streets that kind of make up your block. That's in a nutshell what a census block is. And so they did this for the 60 census blocks. They did it twice. And so we have that data from their project. And then I applied a statistical technique, which I won't get into here, where I modeled that as a function of the demographics in the area, economic variables in the area, such as income, education levels. And we were able to use that, and we'll talk a little bit more about what the results say in just a minute here. We were able to use that statistical model then to extrapolate and to estimate the amount of TPW that we would expect to see in the rest of San Diego County. And again, and this is at one point in time, right? They were not just collected for the most part, this data on one day. So then, of course, we could extrapolate that to the entire year as well.
Great, thanks, guys. We'll move forward. Do you want to talk a little bit about the challenges of this?
Yeah, really quickly. There's these things are, and we alluded to some of these things already. I think these things are not always as easy as they sound. And the proportional estimation method, for example, is conceptually very appealing because I think it's very easy to understand. There are certainly data constraints. For example, we've learned in this project it's a lot harder for cities to tell us what their total litter abatement costs are. I mean, you think that number might already be floating around out there. It is for some cities. For others, it's just, their data is just not collected that way. They're budgetary and so forth. So it's more of a challenge for them. Sales volume data, we know, for example, that sales estimation approach is it generally undercounts sales. If we knew that it undercounted consistently, then that wouldn't be too much of a problem because we would just add some adjustment to it. But I think we don't really know whether it does so consistently. Also, the sales volume estimation relies on this, what we call a productivity measure, how many butts can be picked up, or how much tobacco product waste can be picked up in an hour, let's say, because that's a key. If we know how much is on the ground, and in order to convert that to a cost, we have to figure out how much it costs to pick it up, and we have to have some measure of productivity of that activity. So again, in this case, we get that measure of productivity from the York Mott study that was alluded to earlier, but we may not have that for other jurisdictions, nor it may not make sense for us to take the numbers from that study and apply them in other jurisdictions. It might make sense, but it may not. We have to. That would be something that we have to study more carefully.
And so in terms of the statistical estimation, and the problem with that is it's, as John called it, data thirsty. It's really data intensive. And collecting data, I don't know how many of you know this, but collecting data like this is very expensive. And so it requires a lot of labor, a lot of time. And so the problem, the problem with this part is that we just don't have a lot of the data. I think, Tom, you can go to the next slide. Oops, this is not, okay, sorry. I guess John's going to jump back in. I'll come back in just a minute. Okay, sorry.
All right, John. We will revisit that issue.
Yes, we will.
We talked about when we compare all the methods, but just the proportional estimation method, again, and we move to this, I and Tom were involved in the study that where we were able to estimate tobacco product waste costs for the 30 largest cities in the country, and in that group included LA, San Diego, San Jose, and San Francisco. So we were able to get some estimates for those California cities. And the San Francisco estimate that we found in that study, which by the way was 100% based on estimation. There was no, actual budget data coming from any cities or anything like that. That study used only, relatively easily obtainable public data. We found that the number that simulation model estimated for San Fran actually was very similar to the number that we calculated when we did the study for San Fran, where we had privy to actual budget data collected in the city. we did the proportion that we used was from litter audits that were done in the city. So we were able to actually do some pretty good calculations, detailed calculations in San Fran. And then this simulation model actually returned a similar number, about $4 million annual. This is annual numbers. So that was interesting. We also, as part of this effort, this current project that we've been all working on for a while now, we collected data from Santa Cruz, and they gave us the cost of all litter abatement, and then we were able to apply the 25% parameter and calculate for Santa Cruz their approximate TPW costs. And that comes out to about 2 million using the proportional estimation approach. Which, when you think about the estimates that we got from the 2020 study for the other cities in California, that this amount actually kind of makes sense. That so recall San Jose and San Francisco were each about 4 million. And this is showing Santa Cruz about 2 million. It seems somewhat plausible. If there's anyone from Santa Cruz on the attending the webinar, they maybe can weigh in on this, but we think this looks kind of plausible, at least relative to the other estimates that we got using the proportional estimation method.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is Tara from Santa Cruz. I would say that those numbers look right. I know that you worked with our public works department and others. So yeah, I think that that's a rather astounding number.
Yeah, great. Well,
I'm looking forward to sharing that with our policymakers.
Well, yeah, well, Tara, thank you and your crew for giving us the data in the first place. We very much appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, I think this shows that you can use a pretty, again, relatively simple method to come up with something that makes sense. And I want to emphasize this method's different than what we did in that 2020 paper, which, well, somewhat different. There's some similarities, but the 2020 paper also estimated costs. So here at least with Santa Cruz, with Tara's help, we got actual cost data from the city and applied the similar parameters. So there is hope for this type of method.
Thank you. A few other words. I think, Ron, you had wanted to comment a little bit
Yes.
more about.
So this is just a little bit more detail of what we did. So we basically, to get this to a more, I guess all the methods are rigorous, but in terms of being able to extrapolate the methodology, this might be the easiest one to do, although it's data intensive. That's the issue. That's what we're talking about a few minutes ago. But we basically took this really unique data from Matt et al., their 2023 study, and we apply statistical techniques to this to, like I was saying, to come up with an estimate of how much TPW we would expect to find on any given day in all of San Diego County. So we're using only 60 census blocks, which, there is Tom, if you go to the next slide, there are almost 27,000 census blocks in San Diego. And this is what we were alluding to earlier. It's very expensive to do this, so they were only able to go out to 60 of them, but it's very, very accurate data. And so what we did is we then applied this model to it, and we came up with an estimate of about 4.7 million cigarette butts that would be in San Diego County, in the on the ground, in publicly available areas, because they did not go into non-public areas when they were doing their counting. So almost 5 million, let's say, cigarette butts on the ground for them to abate. So about 200, almost 250,000 packs of cigarettes in San Diego County. And this is one day. You might expect that to reaccumulate in maybe 2 weeks or 4 weeks. That TPW is going to be back on the ground, right? It's going to be a recurring process. So what we're talking about here in terms of numbers is only at a particular point in time. Okay, so now we have this estimate of how much TPW we'd expect to find in San Diego, and now the question is, what does it cost to abate that, to mitigate that? And so in the Met et al. Study as well, they kept track of the time that it took them to do the mitigation. And that came out to be about 32 units of TPW, mostly cigarette butts, or about 1.6 packs per hour. However, this is a lower bound estimate of the productivity, as John called it a few minutes ago, because that was not the goal of the Met et al. Study, was not to go out and efficiently collect as much TPW as they could find. Their goal is to study the amount, the distribution, and the types of TPW that they were finding, along with picking it up as well. So this is definitely a lower bound. And so if you apply that, if you take that 32 units of TPW, 1.6 packs picked up per hour, and you use the average hourly rate of pay for laborers in San Diego as of 2022, about $17, it comes out to be about $10.50 per pack, or about $2.5 million to pick up this TPW. So it's not a minuscule cost here. We're talking about real cost to somebody out there mitigating this TPW.
And this doesn't include then the stormwater systems, the prevention costs, indirect costs, wastewater treatment. It's only pickup costs, and that is a direct cost then as part of our model.
Right, exactly. And if say that this stuff reaccumulates monthly, you'd multiply that number by 12. So you're talking about over $25 million per year. Or I guess it'd be close to $36 million per year, I guess, doing math in my head. So real resources are being used to abate this TPW, and it doesn't have to happen, right? If it just wasn't flicked into the environment, then we could avoid all these costs. And so, again, as you point out, just these are direct costs, right? Not even the indirect costs.
And this again is one point in time. Now, the researchers also went back to, I think, not all of them, but most of the same areas, and tried to get a sense of what would reaccumulate in a period of how long it was.
So it varied from census block to census block, but our best guess, and we have a new project hopefully coming up to get a better handle on this. This is this reaccumulation that we're talking about. It probably reaccumulates to the same level, roughly the same level, in about a month.
So then this point estimate would be repeated
12 times.
Right.
Yeah, so you're talking what, $30 million or something per year.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's just pickup costs.
Just pickup cost.
All right. Thanks for that. I think that's astounding.
It is.
So going back, we're able to do a comparison of the proportional estimation method, the sales volume estimation method, and this statistical exercise that Ron just mentioned. You guys want to just briefly review these findings?
Yeah. So we've got on the left-hand side here all the variables that one might need to do these three types of methods, and there's obviously other things that we'd like to have, but these are the variables that we needed, and then so we sort of filled in each box as you go across the different methods here. So the proportional estimation method, you can see, is not very data thirsty, and we've got well, actually, we don't even really need to know the population. We just put that in there for the per capita calculations, but we need to know general litter. We need to know the proportion of general litter that is TPW. That 25.33 is sort of a meta-analytic kind of estimate from, I think, 3 different studies. And again, that percentage always sort of coalesces around that number. So it's very straightforward. I would say that proportional estimation method is more of an annual number, because that general litter abatement cost number there comes from a National Resources Defense Council study of litter abatement costs in a bunch of U.S. cities, and San Diego happened to be one of them. So we're able to get a number and then trend it up, adjust for inflation. So it's I hope that number, that 7 or 18 million number, is a reasonably accurate number. If it is, then I think that the TPW estimate of 4.5 million down there in yellow, 4.5 million per year would be a reasonable estimate for San Francisco, based on on those numbers. The sales volume number, again, as we talked about, we get sales volume data, and that would be that top number there, cigarette sales, top number in that column, which is 67 million, about 68 million. We get that from Nielsen, and then we make an adjustment here for undercounting based on Libre et al. But I think one could adjust it more for undercounting when you look at compare those numbers to actual smoking prevalence. We then make an adjustment for smoked outside the home, because obviously if you're littering inside your own house, we're not going to count that. Number of cigarettes, I'm sorry, the mean littering rate, 57.68. That is a meta-analytic kind of number from a bunch of different studies, and that's a number that is debatable and changes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So again, sort of you think of a confidence interval around that number, and that's how we then you just kind of follow it down there, and we end up with a number of a number of cigarettes and a number of packs, and then we have to multiply that by how many packs or how many cigarettes can we mitigate per hour, and that's the number that we take from York Matt study, San Diego study, but we make an adjustment to it because, and I think Ron will touch on this as well. The Matt study wasn't designed to simply go out and mitigate butts. So in other words, they weren't just working for the city and mitigating butts. They were the purpose that they had was to do this more detailed study. So their number of 32 cigarettes per hour is probably a little bit low. So for the sales volume estimation, we just rounded up to 70, and employed or drop that in. So we wind up here with an estimate of 6 million. So about 1.5 million more than the proportional estimation technique. And then Ron can take you through how we got to his number of 2.5 million. I do want to point out, I think that the proportional estimation number and the sales volume number are what could be considered annual numbers just based on the kind of data that feeds into them. I think this statistical estimation number is not really an annual number, but depends a lot on the sort of at what rate litter replenishes, right, Ron?
Exactly. So that's why I know we're a little over time here, so I'll try to wrap this up quickly. So yes, it definitely depends on how quickly the TPW reaccumulates, and so hopefully in the new study we'll get a better handle on that. But so that so the 4.6 million cigarette butts that that we estimate to be found on any given day, that's how quickly that reaccumulates, and if we change our 32 butts per hour productivity number up to closer to 70, but this stuff is reaccumulating more quickly than we thought, then we can be right back in the ballpark of the proportional estimate or the sales volume estimate. So I while these numbers may seem quite different, they're you have to be able to interpret them very carefully, annual versus a monthly or quarterly, whatever happens to be in terms of this reaccumulation and how quickly that happens. So it'll be really good for us to get a better handle on that, and then I'll be much more confident in comparing my estimates with using our statistical model with the proportional and the sales volume technique as well. With that, Tom, I think I'll give it back to you.
All right, great. We want to mention voluntary cleanups a little bit more, just because these are so common. They serve the purpose of really alerting people to the issue of tobacco product waste. The annual international coastal cleanup happens in September, and every year they pick up a million, maybe 2 million cigarette butts around the world. And what that also demonstrates, not just that they are the single most picked up item, that is about 30% of all the pickup that happens on the coastal cleanup, but also that cleanups don't do any good. Meaning that, there's 6 trillion cigarettes sold. We don't know how many for sure are dumped, but it's probably somewhere between 20% or 65%. There's, observational studies, self-report, all sorts of other places. But that's the general range. Well, when you think about 20 to 65% of 5.6 trillion cigarettes, we're not talking 2 million cigarettes making a difference. It's not going to make a difference. What it does do is it points out the importance of tobacco product waste. So what we think would be helpful to actually figure out the costs that are implied with, or that are generated as a result of voluntary cleanups. We wanted to look into that further. So Manny, do you want to just briefly do this?
So we started getting into contact with volunteer organizations about a year and a half, 2 years ago now, including the ones listed on your screen. And we basically talked to them about getting information from their cleanups. And we saw how different each and every organization reported their cleanups, whether it be in a database or just sharing a spreadsheet with us. We found like a real lack of standardization, which made it difficult to really figure out like a number of how many volunteers and how often in between cleanups and things like that. So we thought it would be very important to come up with a paper to kind of outline these difficulties that we faced with the different types of data that it's not, again, standardized. So we wrote a paper which is under review at Public Health Reports, which outlines the benefits of using volunteer data to really pinpoint how many cigarette butts or just tobacco product waste in general we are finding on these beaches, even when they're being cleaned, in some cases every day. By, again, these volunteer organizations, and how it really outlines how important they are in, again, like mitigating tobacco product waste.
And the other thing too is trying to use those cleanup data and the reports of how many people for how many hours at whatever location were used can give us, again, additional economic data, because there is a cost to that. There's an hourly wage cost that could be applied to the voluntary work that it gets done. So the standardized data collection and reporting recommendations we have are shown here on the slide. To get counts of specific TPW, the proportion of all waste that collected is TPW, the specific categories, in fact, the time since the last event and the current environmental conditions, the hours spent collecting, and the number of volunteers. And that'll give us a sense of the economic burden that these voluntary cleanups then bear in terms of tobacco product waste mitigation. So I'm gonna stop here, and actually, if there are any quick questions that anybody would like to ask, I'll review the model toolkit that'll be available as a resource on different websites. We'll tell you about that. Let us know if there's any questions. Anybody want to pop up their hand? And if not, I'll try to whip through this very quickly so you can see what we're trying to do. And I'm going to get rid of one thing and get another one up. Let's see here. There we go. So this is the toolkit that we've been working on. Yep.
Sharing the screen.
Am I not showing it? Oh, I gotta stop the other share probably.
Yeah.
Okay. Then share again, probably. Is it happening? Yep, good. Yeah, so this is our toolkit. Now, again, this isn't gonna just be a plug and play. This is going to be a guideline as to anybody who wants to do this at a community, county, or city level, probably as a project that would kind of provide the background and information about it, as well as the data that are necessary to pull it off. So that's our group. We go through a definition of tobacco product waste, and I think most of you probably have a pretty good sense of this. It's everything. It's not just cigarette butts, but those are the most common one. As we mentioned with the cleanup project here in San Diego, it was 94% of all the stuff that was picked up in those intensive cleanup projects. We are providing this as a toolkit. It's a process rather than as a tool. And it'll be something that a community can be used to see what it costs governments, taxpayers, businesses, and voluntary groups to clean up and dispose of TPW. Data are necessary, and there are going to be people necessary to commit time and energy to this. It takes leadership at a local government agency level to make sure that something like this happens, but that can be supported by tobacco control groups or nonprofit environmental groups or academic people as well in the local community. The toolkit provides terminology, and we'll go over those again with our fact sheets. It describes the basic elements of tobacco product waste costs, that is economic burdens on government and businesses, humanistic burdens, things like environmental damages or fires from cigarette butts, economic and ecosystem burdens that contaminate bodies of water, such as wetlands. So when we did this project, we came up with a conceptual model. And so the toolkit will link to that as well. And that's a several pages long description for those who really want to get into it as to how all of this thinking had evolved for our team. So the three approaches, we've mentioned these: a direct approach, meaning actual estimates of costs specifically incurred for TPW pickup and collection; the proportional method, looking at the proportion of total waste costs that are attributable to cigarette smoking or tobacco use; and the statistical approach, basically using lots of different data to come up with an estimate of what the burdens are. We talk about cost centers. These are the categories of where sources of TPW costs happen: prevention, surface abatement, system abatement through stormwater and wastewater systems, disposals in the landfill, and then there's this unmitigated or indirect stuff that we don't really have a good handle on in terms of what effects there are on the environment. Prevention costs, we mentioned these, enforcements, campaigns, signage, etc. That's all meant to stop the litter from happening. Surface abatement is the mechanical and manual and automatic cleanup, and this can be from public sources or private sources of work. Systems abatement, mostly it's going to be wastewater, stormwater, and wastewater from sewers, actually, sewage rather, that does contain tobacco product waste products. Disposal, mostly in landfill, and even if it gets into the landfill, there may be costs because there's leakage or leaching of the chemicals out of the landfills that has been documented as well. It's not just dumped and gone away. Unmitigated litter, as we mentioned, is something that we don't know. Probably there is a non-trivial cost to this. Quality of life changes, whether it's tourism or just unclean neighborhoods, all have a monetization associated with them. The public costs, we've talked a lot about communities and taxpayers. They bear this. It's called a negative externality, negative economic externality. The community, county, the government, etc., doesn't benefit from smoking necessarily, but it does then bear the cost of the tobacco product waste. Private costs, there are costs to the voluntary groups who go out and do the cleanup, to businesses who have to clean up their environments from tobacco product waste, citizens who have also some burden of tobacco product waste. So the data sources, we're looking at total waste management, stormwater protection, wastewater costs, and then we figure out what the proportion of that is because we have some information from previous research. Data from non-governmental organizations, as we just talked about, in terms of their hours and people devoted towards cleanup, and from businesses in a similar way. The data collection spreadsheet that we developed, and this is, we showed you earlier, for an example from Santa Cruz, lists all of these. It's essentially the protocol that's necessary to collect data for the model. The results are dependent on commitments from people. It's difficult to ask people who are in these branches of government to add this on to their workload without it being a commitment from the government to actually address this issue as something of a priority. So that's the challenge, and identifying the individuals with access to data and the sharing privileges make it something that takes an effort. So we recommend that there be direct engagement with various tobacco control agencies, with those agencies in government that deal with these issues, and try to join in a common cause on being able to pursue the tobacco product waste economic cost estimation. With the private entities, collaborations with voluntary groups, that's usually pretty effective already. And the standardized protocol that we just suggested would help in terms of being able to cost out what the efforts are provided by voluntary groups. We'll have a smartphone app in next year that might help out on this as well. The statistical approach, again, this is data intensive. This is going to take help from probably an academic or other economic consultants. And it requires modeling and econometric sort of expertise, but it is a way of actually getting an approach to the manual cleanup cost that we discussed. I'm going to skip over these because they show all sorts of formulas that you can look at and study, and here's the definitions for those if you're interested. We talked about the product sales data, and this helps give us an idea of the potential tobacco product waste in a given market area as a result of the tobacco product sales. And again, if you look at what 20 to 60% of TPW is discarded, you might just expect what is sold to end up as discarded 20 to 60% of it as the tobacco waste burden in that market area. This is available in San Diego, the Bay Area, Sacramento, and Los Angeles from Nielsen IQ. Putting it all together, adding up the manual costs, the private sector cleanup costs, system costs if available, and the prevention costs makes up this model. And that's what we hope is able to be done with sufficient effort. The secondary costs are the last piece of this, the fifth piece. Again, so much of TPW is not collected and therefore it's unmitigated. And so we think that there are going to be likely substantial ecosystem costs, chemical pollution, neighborhood degradation, things like that we can't, we don't have a data set for, but it's there. So for policy, estimating these direct costs, even just the cleanup costs, give a good sense of what the burden is to communities, governments, and people who live in communities. The secondary ecosystem costs are likely to be substantial. We don't know if human health is impacted by them, but what we do know is that cleanups and anti-litter laws and anti-litter campaigns and public service announcements aren't really going to make it happen. There need to be other more substantial economic-oriented policy options to reduce tobacco product waste. One of those that has been done by San Francisco, and it's the only place in the country that did this, was to add a litter fee to the price of tobacco products. Now, subsequent legislation says you can't add litter fees because it's a tax, and in order to add that tax, you have to have a 2/3 vote. Well, that's true. A litter fee still could be added on, just as grocery stores do with sacks, plastic bags, but they keep that fee in the store to manage that litter issue. So, it is possible still to add litter fees, but right now, that's not been tried by any other city. Prohibiting smoking in outdoor public places helps to denormalize smoking and reduce the burdens of TPW. Beaches, outdoor dining areas, even streets can be prohibited. It's well within the capabilities of local communities. restricting the sales of tobacco products, banning the sale of the cellulose acetate filtered cigarettes could go a long way in reducing the plastic pollution and the butts that are left on the ground, because the tobacco itself is going to biodegrade, but the cellulose acetate filter won't. And so that's something that's not been tried by anybody except at the state level here in California 3 times. Each time it was killed in committee and not moved forward as a result of tobacco industry interference. Banning the single-use disposable vapes is something that should be considered, because they really have no purpose in terms of and they have no benefit in terms of environmental consciousness in terms of their impact. Reducing distributor density is something that others have considered for other reasons that would probably help tobacco product waste as well. So there will be a list of resources, and this toolkit will be up on the California Tobacco Prevention Program website, as well as the Center for Tobacco and the Environment website, along with other resources like a white paper that we did last year also for the tobacco product, for the California Tobacco Program. So that's the end of that. And I'm going to stop sharing here. And I know that's a lot, but yeah. It'll provide a read for many of you, and I hope will provide more educational opportunities. I think what we'll do now is quickly go through the rest of the.
There's a few comments in the chat.
Okay, yeah. Could you go ahead and summarize those, please?
Yeah, the first one is making the point that isn't most municipal cleanup done mechanically, done by hand. If so, doesn't that change the time spent on cleanup and therefore for modeling?
Yeah, I mean, they are both. There are places where cleanup are difficult areas where it is actually done by broom and manual effort. So and if it's possible to separate those out, yeah. But most is mechanical, and even if probably the small amount of it is done manually, but voluntary groups, businesses, private individuals would be most likely using manual cleanup, but yeah, most of it is.
And then another one from Ariel Thomas, and it's about reducing distributor or retail, or retail density as a policy option. I know we as LLAs focus on retail density rather than distributors.
Retail density, yeah, I guess I kind of lumped them together. A distributor, I guess in the pure sense would be the wholesaler or something like that. But yeah, it's the seller, retail density rather than distributor density. Any others?
That's
okay. Julian, could you just briefly review the fact sheets that we're also going to be making available?
Yes, happy to do so. Thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. This is Julene. I'm a associate professor at Cal State East Bay. So I'm going to do a really quick overview of the fact sheets that we created as part of the implementation plan.
They got them.
Sorry?
And they got them.
Which you should have received. So you can take a look at these on your own time, but I'm also going to be sharing some slides that highlight just a couple of these fact sheets. So we have 3 main fact sheets. One, which is an overview of the 3 different approaches that can be used to estimate tobacco product waste costs. There's one on tobacco product waste environmental economics, just kind of a general overview. And then one for key terminology, which just is a very long fact sheet. It's actually a 3-page one, which covers some of the terminology, the terms, the jargon, what have you, that we use in our implementation toolkit, our model, just to give somebody kind of a high-level overview of each of these topics. And so these 3 fact sheets range from 1 to 3 pages. They're intended to be a very high level overview that are short, succinct summaries of the key concepts. and they are designed to be user-friendly, targeting a broad audience. So just basically a crash course on what you need to know in order to understand if you were, reviewing one of our papers or some of the toolkit or the other materials that we're putting out. So here's a snapshot just of the 5 pages that encompass the 3 different topics of fact sheets. So what I'm going to do in the next few slides is just highlight a couple of these and go into a little bit of depth so you can get an idea of what these look like. So this is one of the first ones that we created. Again, this is an overview of the 3 approaches to estimate tobacco product waste abatement costs. So this is what we were talking about before in the prior slides, where we talked about the 3 approaches: direct approach, proportional approach, and the statistical approach. And for this fact sheet, it's just, again, a high-level overview. What is each of these approaches? And then also, what are some of the benefits of using one approach over some of the others? And what are some of the drawbacks? So again, some of the things that we highlight here are how readily available or accessible the data may be, how readily one might be able to get that data versus how much work it might take to be able to find or gather that data, and also some other benefits or drawbacks in terms of ease of implementation or calculation. The next fact sheet is one that's a little bit more, we tried to minimize the amount of text, believe it or not, on each of these fact sheets. This one is a little text heavy, so what I'm going to do in the next slide is kind of zoom into the first part of it. So this is the fact sheet on environmental economics. And so it's just giving someone really a crash course on if you really didn't know too much on environmental economics or tobacco product waste, what are the key things that you would need to know to be able to understand, say, a paper that we're publishing on this topic. So it gives a very high level overview of what is tobacco product waste. In general, what are some of the costs of tobacco product waste? And this is exactly what we are trying to estimate with our 3 different approaches when we're gathering data and kind of implementing using the different models that we talk about. The next slide will zoom into the second half of this fact sheet. So it talks about the prevention costs of tobacco product waste, as well as, most importantly, some of the data sources that one might need to have access to, or data that one might need to generate in order to be able to apply each of these models to get a tobacco product waste abatement cost estimate for one's geographic location. And I think next slide. Okay. That's it. That's the fact sheet. So
Okay. Anyway, those should have been sent out. I hope you got them. If not, we can again send them again. I just wanted to mention, stakeholders. We've had a couple of stakeholder meetings along the time that we've been working on this project. Certainly the city and county waste management agencies, voluntary environmental groups and tobacco control groups, NGOs, taxpayers themselves, businesses, public health agencies, fire departments, because of the fire hazard associated with cigarette butt disposal, lifeguards who do the enforcement of smoke-free beaches, for instance, here in California, and the Ocean Protection Council, which is concerned about plastics in the ocean, and water boards who are responsible for stormwater maintenance. There's a CASCA, which is the Stormwater Association. Again, because of the crash amendment to the Clean Water Act, storm drains and cities who are responsible for them are going to be tasked with preventing anything greater than 5 millimeters from getting into the storm drains as of the year 2030. So all of that has an equity in trying to prevent, mitigate, remove, pay for tobacco product waste. So again, policy implications for these estimation projects would be to inform consumers and policymakers about the externalities of tobacco product waste. Consider assigning liability for these things to the manufacturers and distributors. Potentially adding litter fees to the cost of cigarettes, but that has to again remain with the retail collectors of the fee. Here in California, at least. Product sales restrictions, as I mentioned, I'm a big fan of trying to ban the sale of filtered cigarettes. At some point, I know that's going to happen, just as we have banned flavors and menthol. There will be a lot of resistance to this because it's so, 99.8% of all cigarettes sold in this country are filtered with the cellulose acetate filter. And that is something that is the most effective marketing tool ever, really. but it's a fraud. It does not protect human health. It is a plastic, non-biodegradable, single-use plastic waste product that could be removed and at the same time probably would reduce the uptake of smoking by youth and probably help those who are trying to quit by making it less palatable. And then litigation, which has worked in the past, as I started out saying, when money talks, everything else walks, and litigation sometimes can make that money real. So anyway, it's something that could happen in the future. So I just want to leave you with this message from our friends who are surfers in the UK, no butts on the beach, that cigarette butts are toxic and that we're looking at plastic. So we're happy to have had all of you on this call today. We've got a few minutes here for additional questions if anybody has them. I'm going to stop sharing my slides and invite you to raise your hand or enter into the chat room. Any questions you might have.
Rachel has her hand up.
Where will these resources be available? They'll be available on the California Tobacco Prevention website, the Tobacco Prevention Program website for the state, and also on the Center for Tobacco and the Environment here at San Diego State University. Maybe we can.
And Rachel, yes, we can, but Rachel has her.
Yeah, Rachel.
Hi, I thought my question was answered, but I just want to make sure that I'm circling back to this. So you talked about doing a litter fee.
Yeah.
And I'm curious regarding how that would apply, because if it's being applied as with a purchase of a product at a store, that's effectively would be a tax. And so if there is a proposal for cities to conduct a litter fee, is that something that would be assessed on the whole city and every resident to make it like legal and not like singling out people? Or how would that work effectively to pass legal muster?
Well, you're with the Public Health Law Center. You can tell us that?
Well, I don't think it's possible is why I'm asking for the litter
right.
fee, because it's a tax if you're applying it during the purchase. So I was also curious, is there an approach for taking these survey results in these studies to apply and have it as movement for legislation to pass as a tax?
Oh. Well, it's a great question. I'm sure most people know that, when when San Francisco passed that litter fee, there was a citizen initiative, quote unquote, that then got a law passed that said it had to be 2/3 vote of the taxed individuals, that these things are not fees, they're taxes, no matter what you say. And so that's why nobody else has done them lately. Now, my understanding, I thought was information that came from the Public Health Law Center, that you can add a fee, but it has to be used by the seller of that product to mitigate some damage that that product causes to, not mitigate damages, but pay for something that has to do with the product at the seller's level. So that would be a kind of a hard sell. On the other hand, it might be worth a try to someone just to think about how to do that and challenge the system. But anyway, it is, litter fees may not work here in California because of what that legislation has done, unless the legislation has changed, or unless, I thought 2/3 votes of the local environment can happen. Carolina, you're more of an expert on this than I.
Oh, sorry. Rachel and I have kind of researched this issue, but yes. So you're correct. There's like multiple moving parts, which is why this is kind of complex to understand just because of the way that it was done. But yes, you're right. So there is there has been a statute in California that preempts any kind of tax on the sale, distribution, or promotion of tobacco. So that's kind of that's one of the only preemptive statutes that we have when it comes to tobacco control in California. So that's been the case, right? So when San Francisco adopted their litter abatement fee, that they called it a fee, and at the time it didn't really count as a tax. So what happened with the citizen petition you were mentioning was that after the fact, they expanded the constitutional definition of what is a tax in California for any fee at all that, so it made it very broad. So any fees really that local jurisdictions might adopt are likely going to fall under the category of tax, whether they're related to tobacco or not. The problem, so then you need the 2/3 vote, right, and of the electorate to be able to pass it. So that's still, you need if you wanted to like have some kind of tax or some kind of fee on this issue, it would probably be constituted a tax. In order to pass a ballot, you would need, in order to actually institute a litter fee, you would need 2/3 vote of the electorate. But then you have this additional complicating litigation factor that, they might just say, well, this is a tax, and taxes and whether they're passed by 2/3 of the electorate or not are preempted in California because you are essentially taxing the sale, distribution or promotion of tobacco products. So there could be perhaps some argument to be made to counter that, to say, this is really a tax on the disposal, not really a tax on the promotion or the sale. But since it is done at this point of sale, it may be a tough sell in the court. So that's just to put that out there. Now, the fees that you were talking about at the retailer level, that is, I think maybe we're thinking about tobacco retailer license fees that can be assessed. So we have been thinking like if there's a way that there could potentially be a way to assess an additional fee for disposal for just a generation of primarily of hazardous waste that tobacco retailers generate, and kind of include that in the licensing fee. So it wouldn't be a fee that is like tied to any specific product or any specific type of litter. It would just be like, in order for us to give you the license and for us to run the licensing program and somehow put it under there. That is still, there are some complications when it comes to that too, because it is arguable that, you're talking about the cleanup after the fact that is not necessarily done at the retailer. So, there would have to be some tailoring to be able to figure out exactly how to go around that. But when it comes to the litter fees, there is very likely to be some litigation, and we don't have, I think there are some potential arguments to be made, but I don't, I couldn't say like how likely they would be to win over the arguments that the industry will most likely make.
Yeah, and they will argue. Thanks a lot, Caroline. Kara, did you have a comment?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Since Carolina and everyone is talking about policy, Carolina, I wondered if you wanted to mention at this point the work that Public Health Law Center has been doing with the county, Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors around policy language that would specifically ban the sale of rolled filtered tobacco products. Am I ahead of myself, Carolina, or can we share that information now?
This is all up to you, Tara. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, go for it.
We have, Tara has been leading this amazing effort to get, bring up the idea of banning the sale of, what is called filtered cigarettes and little cigars or cigarillos that are similar enough to cigarettes. So I want to say she's been the driving force behind this, and we just try to provide some of the language that could potentially achieve this. It's been we had a bit of back and forth, and Dr. Novotny also helped us out with this to figure out how to use this terminology that is not just calling it a filter and just continuing that perception that this is a health related component. So what we came up with is a term. It's called partially inconsumable cigarettes, and also partially inconsumable cigars. And then we have defined cigarettes and cigars so that it is tailored to include only the types of products that the county would be open to to eliminating, so not all cigars, but basically anything that would have a cellulose acetate filter. But going beyond that, and the reason why we call it partially inconsumable and didn't define that as being plastic or any material is because we wanted to make sure that we didn't fall into that trap of having to show what material this is made of every single time. Since the industry can, it's basically the burden would be on the county to show that this is a product that is banned most likely. And so we wanted to avoid that, and also avoid any kind of innovative and new product that could be similar enough to plastic or cellulose acetate, but it's something else. So we just kind of went with all, including anything that could be called biodegradable, since a lot of times things could potentially be called biodegradable, but don't actually biodegrade in the way that that you would imagine like compost doing in your backyard. So so that was another consideration that we had. And then also, the way that we defined it, it would be so that, yes, most of the products that would be included would be the ones that are using that particular standard size of filter, right? That is the one that you normally see in traditional, filtered cigarettes and little cigarillos or some other of the products that are basically cigarettes, but maybe just have a few little tweaks like the material of the wrapper or just the slight length addition, so they can try to call them something else and get around some of those laws. So this is and this is for Santa Cruz County. So that's been a really exciting process, and like I said, Tara has been kind of the driving force and the vision for this. So it's been really fun, and hopefully I know you had just had the meeting. I don't know if you want to share any of that, Tara, or maybe offline afterwards, but
no, I just wanted to throw it out there so people realize that there are other policy options. They're cutting edge at this point, but I feel like we're right on the cusp of something, and having this new product definition language is super helpful. The County Board of Supervisors Committee has approved the language, and they're now sharing it with the 4 other jurisdictions in the county with the hope that they might do some sort of cross-jurisdictional approach to this issue.
Great work. Thanks for taking it so seriously. It's really been great to see how this has evolved there.
Thanks, Tom. And I have to say, Carolina and Tom at Public Health Law Center have been genius. So they came up with this language, and we're all pretty excited about it.
Great. Thanks again. Nicholas, do you want to talk about the survey real quick?
Yes, we have I know we are running out of time, but we have a quick survey that we would like you all to take some time to answer. I'm gonna post the link right here, and it's mostly about what do you all think about today's webinar, the presentation, and some of the tools we will be providing.
And whether or not you were able to understand anything we said. So we really appreciate your attendance. Those of you who stayed through the end here, it's been a lot of work to pull this stuff together, but we hope it does become valuable as over time. It's certainly not a finished product, but it certainly is something I think that can stimulate further work.
So I shared the link, so any feedback is welcome. Please answer the survey for the last minute we have of this meeting. And there's still actually a couple questions. Ariel Thomas mentioned, is this for County of Santa Cruz or City?
Yeah, she answered
Yeah, I
that.
replied.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Anyone else? Okay, so let me know if you have any problems with the link, please. As well, that I just shared.
And again, thank you to the rest of our team, Ron, John. Ariel, you had a question, you got your hand up?
Yeah, just a quick question about the survey. The first question asks how we attended the presentation, and one of the options is in person or recording. Is in person intended to be live via Zoom?
It's for people who end up coming like here, like.
Well, actually, no,
Right.
you recorded this, right?
Oh, yes, yes, that's correct.
Yeah, you were live.
You were live.
Okay, so the in-person option would be correct for those who attended this current meeting live?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, because some might be able to access it, right?
Well, I have a question. So I would love to know if there are any like specific citations that we could use to cite some of this research and the specific data that was collected for the different cities and any presentations going forward or any findings of fact for ordinances or any of the sort, if it is ready at this point or if we should wait a little longer.
I mean, on what we've just presented, the newer stuff, you probably have everything we've written in the past, Carolina, but you mean with this particular?
Yeah, just the most recent numbers, just because they're so impactful.
We've got a journal article that we're getting ready to finish off that has all of that. And otherwise, let's see, the slides, would that help at all? I mean, we can make those available on the websites as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say that you could add it to the website and then
Yeah.
just cite the website.
Right.
That could.
We'll add the slides to the website at least.
Yeah.
Tom, I think the WHO article has a lot of the.
Yeah, it does. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's cited on the website or on the slides too, so they can get it up there, but we can put that up as well, just the article's free open access, so. I think what we'll do, I mean, I'm not sure how the state will host their website materials yet, because we haven't given them everything yet. But what we'll probably do is at the Center for Tobacco and the Environment here at SDSU, which has a website, I believe it's live and functional. Yeah, we'll have a subsection there on the economic cost study.
Yeah. So we can post the toolkit and all this other stuff.
Okay.
Team. This is Rafael Coloma from the California Tobacco Prevention Program. Great job on the presentation today, but just to speak on the resources going on our website, what we're looking at right now is to have it on our CTPP partners page alongside our existing tobacco product waste resources. So I still have to have some talks with some folks internally if it's going to be some other places as well, but I believe that is the plan at the moment. But that may take a minute before it gets over there.
Right. We're probably after January 31st when we finish up everything.
Correct. And I think you're also looking to have some of these final documents informed by some of the questions and discussions that have happened today. And
that's correct
as well.
Right. That was the idea. So, we're giving you more time, or what are we doing here on that?
I think we're good. I don't know unless if anyone has any more questions.
Well, we'll encourage you to finish the questionnaire. I think it's pretty well.
It's not long.
No, it's short.
Yeah.
And do they have to be still on?
No, they can access
They
it.
can do it, okay. Otherwise, let me again thank everybody. Thanks to our team, John in Florida, Ron wherever he is here in San Diego, Julian here and Maggie and Maddie rather, and Nicholas here at the Center for Tobacco and Education. Thank you all, and let's keep in touch on this. I hope it's something that can stimulate some further policy development.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay.